This is the download recap from Sounds Profitable, your essential news from this week and why it matters to people in the business of podcasting. I'm Gavin Gaddis. As usual, the download recap is brought to you by Podscribe. You can find out more by heading over to podscribe.com. Let's get started. Now, before I get into the top stories, I want to tell you all about an event that's coming up next week. SiriusXM Media, Barometer, Signal Hill Insights, and Sounds Profitable are banding together for a live one-hour webinar titled From Insights to Action, Turning Podcast Trends into Campaign Strategy. That kicks off at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Thursday, February 19th. Registration is free and live now. Link in the show notes. Now we're going to talk about the politics of what we listen to. This is by Tom Webster. It sounds profitable. Semi-regularly, Tom is quizzed about the political makeup of podcast listenership. These requests are usually motivated by theories or popular impulses. For example, podcasts are largely for liberals, or on the opposite, conservative podcasts rule the roost now. Looking at the Podcast Landscape 2025's data, the reality is when one looks at the self-prescribed political identity of respondents who've listened to a show in the past 30 days, American podcast listening is almost perfectly divided into thirds. 32% liberal, 30% conservative, 33% moderate. Here's a quote from the article, quote, "If that surprises you, it probably shouldn't, given what we know about the growing breadth and diversity of the podcast audience. But it does tend to surprise people because we've all been marinating in narratives about filter bubbles and partisan media silos for so long that it feels wrong for any media channel to be this evenly distributed. And yet, here we are." End quote. While the audience as a monolith is evenly divided, individual genres have their biases. For example, TV and film is the most liberal-leaning with a 19-point gap between them and the conservative audience share. On the opposite end, conservatives outpace liberals by about 7 points in business. Political talk is almost as evenly split as the overall audience, clocking 34% liberal, 26% conservative, and 29% moderate. Certain genres will reach certain audiences by dint of them specifically appealing to that group. No one genre has influenced its audience to skew that direction. Rather, those genres produced engaging content that appeals to those specific audiences, and those specific audiences have found that content. As the nation's eyes turn to Minneapolis, they're also turning to Minnesota Public Radio. Neiman Lab takes a look at Q4 2025 performance metrics for public radio stations based on web traffic. Minnesota Public Radio topped off the list as the number one for December and November of last year, with Oregon Public Broadcasting taking the top spot in October. It's worth noting the killings of Renee Good and Alex Peretti happened in early January, so those aren't impacting the numbers for NPR. The October-December boost for Minnesota Public Radio traffic stems from the longer story of ICE presence in Minneapolis and nearby Chicago during Q4 of last year, drawing press attention to the area. NPR's performance shows what happens when public media is able to exist and do the work it was designed to do from the start. Local journalism produced locally gets results. In a recent conversation with Thomas DiNapoli, VP, Head of Sales and Underwriting at APM and NPR, I asked about the realities of bringing local journalism like this to market and how advertisers have responded. He recounted a decision to launch nightly call-in shows on NPR to discuss issues happening on the ground in Minneapolis. Quote, "We had advertisers signing up within less than 12 hours of seeing the package for the first time. That's what happens when the advertiser already has faith in the audience you're delivering, the product you're bringing them, the message that you create, the environment that they're going to be in, and they believe in your mission. When it's all working, it looks like that. It looks like on a Monday morning, the newsroom calls you, talks about what they're going to do that night, and by 5 p.m, you have ads being placed." End quote. It's time for a bit of a news meatloaf. Earning calls, reports, and data. Oh my. It's time for Q4 reports that are trickling in. I've got several for you today. First up, Rain News covered SiriusXM Media's Q4 report. While over the entire year, SiriusXM lost 301,000 self-paying, for self-paying in this context being subscribers not bundled into other purchases, such as somebody who bought a car with a SiriusXM subscription. Q4 showed 110,000 new self-pay users. Spotify's Q4 2025 earnings are posted, showing 290 million premium subscribers, a new record for Spotify and a 10% year-over-year increase. Pod News has a good breakdown of Spotify's podcasting-specific details as well. Here's a quote from that. Quote, ad sales all over Spotify dropped in 2025 by a total of $21 million, minus 1%. But podcast ad sales dropped in the year by almost 99 million due to optimization of podcast inventory. However, the costs to Spotify making podcasts also decreased in 2025, helping ad-supported gross margin improve. End quote. Finally, Acast report shows a strong Q4. Looking ahead at the full year of 2025, Acast net sales growth hit 29% year over year. Growth they attribute specifically to Acast North America's regional expansion, which experienced net sales growth of 60%. Countries across Europe take action to ban social media for minors. According to Gizmodo's reporting, at least 15 governments in the EU are planning social media bans for minors, inspired by a December ban in Australia that kicked any kid under 16 years old off social media. One side effect of trying to keep kids from rewiring their brains with dopamine-dispensing apps and networks is how they are banned from them. Some companies comply on a per-country basis. Some preempt EU legislation by enacting their own, similarly to how Discord has announced their intention to globally treat all accounts as teenagers until proven otherwise. That is, if their in-house system can determine if the user already was an adult, or if a suspected teenager submits their face for a scam to prove that they are an adult. Given podcasting's roots as an open RSS distributed medium, social media restrictions don't necessarily impact podcasts directly, nor should they necessarily impact the apps used to consume podcasts outside of existing age restrictions for platforms like YouTube or Spotify. That said, it could have an impact on the platforms podcasts most often use to build audiences in the first place. It's time for the quick hits. These are articles I covered this week that didn't make it top story in today's episode, but are still worth including in your weekend reading. Here's what I've got for you this week. First up, Red Seat Ventures has announced the acquisition of premium podcast feed platform Supercast, which is slated to continue operating autonomously under founder Jason Su Hoy. Dwellspring, the company launched from the podcast 12-Hour Sound Machines, has debuted an interactive audio engine in their mobile app that allows users to build their own bespoke soundscapes for relaxation. Magellan AI has published their Q4 podcast advertising benchmarks, showing podcast ad spend is up 32% year over year. John Boy Media, an independent digital sports media company backed by the MLB, has announced they have signed an annual partnership with Listener.com to act as an AI intel layer over their podcast network and media operations. NPR covers the launch of On the Docket, a project from the University of Minnesota done in partnership with Spooler and iDib Group. This project takes audio from landmark Supreme Court cases and adds generative AI animations of what the justices must have looked like while delivering their opinions. And the 69th annual New York Emmys are currently accepting entries, and the official release specifically notes that video podcasts are eligible for their talk program categories. So if you're in New York and you got something that's relevant, consider submitting. That was the download recap brought to you by Sounds Profitable. I know I go through the stories fast, so reminder, the one link in your show notes takes you to today's episode post on soundsprofitable.com, where all of the news items are linked, and you can click them to your heart's content. The download recap is brought to you by Podscribe and soundsprofitable.com. I'm Gavin Gaddis. Our producers are myself, Brian Barletta, and Tom Webster. And as usual, thanks to you for sticking with me as I brought you all the top stories you might have missed this past week.
Download complete.